The original ceiling consisted of this basic white aluminum soffit material, which is fine. I mean, it serves its purpose, but it's not the most attractive thing to look at. I started off this project by removing the aluminum panels and the C-channels which hold it up. I then added a bunch of 2x4 blocking around the whole perimeter. This is going to support the extra weight of the new ceiling and a few more areas to fix too. For the new ceiling, I'm using 1x4 cedar tongue and groove panels. I gave the back of the cedar a coat of stain because I'm unable to do this once the cedar is up in position. Along the joists to which I'm going to be attaching the new ceiling to, I applied a small bead of construction adhesive to help fight against gravity. I purchased the cedar boards in 6 feet in length, which is the exact width of this end of the entryway. I placed the first board tight against the siding of the house, and I attached the boards to the joist by pinning through the tongue of the cedar paneling using my 18 gauge brad nailer. I repeated these same steps, laying each board at a time, the exact same way, pinning through the tongue into the joist. Every so often I'll tap a section tight, make sure all the little gaps close up, using a scrap piece of wood and my hammer. And also using a roofing square, I'll check every so often to make sure that I'm still running square from the house, and then I'll adjust accordingly if not. It's a fairly simple process which I continued throughout the whole ceiling. Because of the beam, I was unable to get a hidden fix in through the tongue, so I pinned the last few boards through the face. Once the new ceiling was up, it's time to cover up these beaten up old beams. Usually when I reface old beams, I would create like a U-shaped cap and then just slip them over, but because there's so many scribes in this, I had to cut each piece individually. For the material, I'm using 1-inch paintable comb face, which is a pretty common material for exterior trim. I took down all the measurements needed for the inside of the first section, cut it to length with my miter saw, and then ripped it down on my table saw, ensuring there's a 45-degree angle at the bottom. I then held it up to mark any scribing that needed doing. I cut all the scribes for this section using my jigsaw. I placed a few blobs of construction adhesive to the back and then held the piece into position using clamps. For the fixings, I'm using 2-inch exterior grade trim head screws. Using the trim head screws, I fixed the comb face into position. I then repeated the same steps on the adjacent beam. I measured and cut the outside piece using the same steps as before. Except this time, as well as a 45-degree angle at the bottom, I cut out a little channel to accommodate this little wire that's hanging down. This just makes the whole thing a lot tidier. I attached the outside pieces the exact same way as before, using construction adhesive and trim head screws. I took a measurement from the two 45-degree cuts of the underside of the beam, and then cut and scribed a piece to suit those measurements. And then continuing the same steps as before, using construction adhesive, I also used wood glue on the miters. Once I was happy with the position, I pinned the corners using my brad nailer. This just helps them keep them nice and tight. I found that it also helps to adjust the trim head screws in and out until all the gaps disappear. Once all the miters were tight, I permanently fixed the underside using the trim head screws. For the long outside run of the beam, I removed the C channel which was holding the aluminum soffit into place. Using the same steps as before, I measured from the soffit to the underside of the beam. I then measured from the house to the outside miter. I cut a length of comb face to those measurements, again ensuring a 45-degree angle at the bottom. I also cut a 45-degree miter on the outside, this way that the whole beam just kind of looks like one whole piece. I attached it the same way using construction adhesive and trim head screws. I then measured the width and the length of the underside section, and then attached it the exact same way using construction adhesive and trim head screws, adjusting the screws in and out until the gaps close up tight. Because comb face is a rough material, I filled all the holes and any deficiencies using caulk, and then with a wet rag, I just wipe it flat. I found once painted, this blends in pretty well. To finish the sealant, I'm using Benjamin Moore's Arbor Coat Translucent. Though, having gone through this, if I was going to do it again, I would finish the panels before installing the sealant, because you know, gravity, and it gets messy. It also really aches your arm painting over your head like this. While the sealant dries, I went round covering up all the seams that needed it with a 1-inch strip of comb face. I attached the 1-inch strip using my brad nailer, ensure that I'm using nails that don't go through the both thicknesses of comb face. That way I don't risk hitting the internet wire. I wanted to add a couple of pot lights to the ceiling, so I set up my laser level dead center of the ceiling, and I made a couple of marks splitting the ceiling into 3/3. On those 2 holes, I drilled a 4 1/8 inch hole to allow for the lights. I spread off the existing outdoor light feed and brought a cable down through the first hole. I also placed a second electrical cable going from one hole to the other. Ensuring that the power is not live and the breaker is off, I spliced the 2 ends of the electrical cable. I'll link the lights that I used down below. They're very DIY friendly and they're fairly simple to install with just basic electrical knowledge. Once the first light is wired up, I pushed all the cables back up into the ceiling and placed the light into position. And then using the same techniques as before, I wired in the second light. I flicked on the breaker to make sure everything was wired correctly. I then placed a piece of trim, the same material as the siding, over the gap where the house sits out of square. I then gave the new beams a fresh coat of paint, and then this part of the project is complete. I was pretty shocked on how much of a difference the new ceiling and refacing the beams actually looks. It really gives this entryway a more grand appearance, and